Hi, I am Sumit Anand. I'm currently working as a lead teacher in IT schools. So IT School is a non-profit organization which is working for under-resourced students in Pune, and we recently expanded to Delhi. I was a Teach for India Fellow 2018er, and in my fellowship, I saw the education is a root weapon for working on the issues that are at the grassroots level. So, and I cater to more of making the inclusive education for people in the state of oppress. So, and I see that how I can, through education, work with students and make their livelihood and life better, and how they can perceive those rights in the future.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Kedia. I'm a final year management student. I have my own startup. And along with that, I'm working at Think Education Advisory Services LLP, where I am working in the frame of and under the capacity of a business development and the capacity of a business development department. And I'm really excited to be here.
And hi everyone, I'm Dhruv Qureshi, and I'm a second year MBBS student at Dr. D.Y. Patil Medical College and Hospital, Pune, and I'm currently pursuing my MBBS. Honestly, it's really great to be here. It's a pretty important topic, especially as a medical student. I find this to be of utmost importance to be spoken of, and it's rather one of the more ignored aspects of including in medical education as well as what we've seen. So it's really great to be here.
Okay, so I would like to introduce you a little bit about the history and that how we have seen homosexuality and the existence of LGBTQ in the ancient text. So I think the Gay and Lesbian Vaishnavi Association Galva highlights in the report of homosexuality, Hinduism, and third gender that everything in the world is a reflection of original, subtle, and spiritual reality. So no matter how much we say that it didn't exist, but if we go back to our ancient texts and Vedas, and we see that there has been a strong existence of homosexuality in a lot of places, right? So the first thing which I would like to talk about is how Amar Das in his book, Tritya Prapti, the people of third sex, talks about that how transgender were not only identified, but were welcomed by the people of the society in the ancient time. And if you see Kama Sutra is one of the most read texts when it comes to sexual interaction and studying sex in detail, we see that there is the existence of Swaranis. So Swaranis were women who indulged in sex with women. Those women were not married. Basically, they married each other. And they, like the gay men at that time, was called the Kirbas, which referred to independent men who again interacted and indulged in like sex or activities with individual men. And there's like a live example that we go around is like Khajuro. We cannot let go of Khajuro in Madhya Pradesh, which has visual in scriptures of how people indulge, like how transgenders have been showcased there, how homosexuals have been showcased there, and then how the existence is still there. And if we go back again to the Ramayana or Mahabharata, so if I talk about Ramayana, even the Rakshasas that we see in Ramayana were basically, most of them were inclined towards one gender, or probably they had shown homosexuality or transgender. And there is an account of how when Hanuman went to Lanka, he saw that women, like women in an intimate positions with each other. When we go back to Mahabharata, I think the most striking example is of Shikhandini. I think that's like a warrior who was a transgender, and that how she was able to fight very strongly in the battle. And we also see that how Arjuna cross-dresses himself, and that how they use those tools, I won't say tools, they use those attires because there has been examples of that existing in the ancient past. And one thing which is like, we religiously study Manusmriti, and we see that how Manusmriti talks about, although there has been violation and then laws which talked about that how they cannot indulge in homosexual sex, But again, the evidence that we see there has been just because there was existence of this homosexuality in the past also. So there is a very vivid example of how they were charged a certain amount of money if they indulge in homosexual sex. So there is a law which talks about a crime that they commit. So if there is an evidence of laws which are opposing it as a crime, so it is a text which is sacredly Brahminical. But again, if it talks about the laws which can take it as a crime, this shows that serious evidence is that how it has existed.
Right, and honestly, like given the entire historical evidences that homosexuality has been a long part of Indian culture and our history. People have this misconception that homosexuality is sort of like a Western thought, and it's actually it's an imported disease sort of a thing, and it's quite the other way around. There are more evidences of it being here, and in fact, it's during colonial eras of various countries. Like for example, Section 377, homosexuality was criminalized in India in the 19th century when the British occupied the country, right? In fact, anti-homosexuality and draconian laws were spread when the West would colonize countries. That's when. So we talk about countries like India, Myanmar, we talk about Bhutan and everything. And so people have this very thinking, oh no, coming out, it's a very Western thing. We don't do this here. This isn't our culture. But the irony is that they don't realize that this was your culture, and in fact, it's what you are right now has been imposed on by the West. It's really like it's quite a bit of a turn on history.
I think with all the evidence that we've seen, like homosexuality and gender orientation has existed throughout our history. It's all about what our generation, or rather in the rural areas, because considering that we are a privileged bunch of individuals who can have this conversation with other individuals and have access to a wide variety of information thanks to the internet. We choose to read about these things and we choose to analyze these things, right? Which is why we actually can have these discussions in metropolitan cities, because metropolitan cities is where the gap between India and other countries is bridged. But when we look at rural areas, they're not aware of how different gender orientations are available for them to explore, or for them to even realize that, okay, fine, they have a certain inclination towards another sex, right? So I think it's important for the fine line to be drawn and explained to everybody between what a sexual orientation is, or what your sex is, and what your gender orientation is. So Sumit, because you work with TFI, could you help us, distinguish between what a sex is and what a gender is?
Yeah, I think like when we talk about sex is like biological identity. So if I am born as a male and my sexual organs say that, okay, I am born as a male, and if other person is born as a female, and the sexual organs tell me that is my particular sex. So when I write in my form, that's something which tells like male, female, and transgender, right? When we talk about gender, I think gender is a very vast concept and it's very fluid. So it's a huge spectrum to which I identify with. Probably I might be a man, but inside myself, my orientation might be that I might have feelings for a man. So that is something which shows that I am a born male, but my orientation or sexuality, which I incline towards, is not, I don't conform with my gender. So when we talk about gender in general, it's like a patriarchal concept of how we run in the society. So a man is said to have those certain attributes and certain ways of behavior and certain activities that he or she can indulge in, right? And for women, there are such specific things in which she can indulge in. So when I talk about gender, I think it's very fluid and it's non-conforming with the society and the conventional norms. It talks about what I identify myself with. And that is something I think, as you pointed out, right? in the rural areas, it's very less. So if I talk about a person probably in Kashmir, it's not that it doesn't, like a person might not identify himself or herself or them as a gay, a transgender, or a transsexual. It's just that they don't know that concept of homosexuality or LGBTQ in general. And for that, I think, again, as I've worked for like 3 years on the ground, and we have come from like privileged boards of ICSE boards and CBSE boards, in which I think there's not a single account of homosexuality, or probably how you identify yourself, not just as a hetero person, probably all different sexuality and how you can indulge in different activities as well. So that's something which is very important. I remember very minutely that how my professor was talking about that if in classroom, if my teacher comes to me and tells me, okay, that I am gay, then that is the person I'm looking upon to. Probably I know that even if that person, because then I know that, okay, my teacher is saying that he or she is a gay or a lesbian or a transgender, then that kid also not that, because we look upon to our teachers when we come to school, we look upon to our professors when we go to colleges, and if they are given the space to identify themselves in the crowd, we might help some students to identify themselves at an early stage. And that is something which lacks in the education system. And that is something which I even try to build. It's just that like you can't push things into the mind of students. You just can let them know of those certain things which exist in the society and how you can build on that. And then the students can confirm or probably say, okay, but this is something which I have been exploring myself. So instead of dismissing it completely, which have happened to a lot of my friends when the teachers made fun of them. Right? Even one of my teachers made fun of me in the school. But again, I didn't care about that because I realized I know myself pretty well and I was extremely confident about myself. But what about people who are still struggling? And again, it's very important to say that how I come from a privileged background. When it's come to privileges, the privilege to the access of right education, privilege to the access of right circle of people. But again, there are certain people and certain, when we talk about casteism, like the lower caste people and the people in the rural areas, they don't have the access to that privilege.
Yeah, and to add to that, like once you settle like in a classroom setting, first is like knowing that you can go beyond the gender conformities that society has imposed upon you. You can go beyond the conventional norms, right? So it's because at a point like no one knows what they are. It's all about finding out. That's quite half the struggle from what I've seen. And once you tell, because if you don't tell them, okay, you know what, homosexuality can exist, like you said, you see that your teacher is gay or your teacher's transgender or the lesbian or whatever they may be, right? Then you see, okay, that is possible, and maybe I am that. But if you haven't seen that, and which as such, like not just rural, even in urban areas, it's quite seeped into that. If you don't see that, and then all of society is saying, you're either male or you're female, and you have to be straight, then this child thinks that there's something wrong with them. Because the psychological effect that it has on them, because to find out that not to know your identity and then carrying it forward to thinking that there's something wrong with you and not being able to speak out loud about it to anyone, and then carrying that with you until you finally figure it out, if you do. So the kind of psychological distress that it imposes on an individual is quite long lasting. And more so, even if we talk about in urban areas, right? There are still a lot of conservative mindsets in urban areas, that there's no denying that. A teacher makes a fun, like, let's say, there's a certain age where everyone's growing up, everyone's attracted to the opposite sex or any other sex or the same sex for that matter. And then teacher finds, like a teacher sees that, okay, fine, girls and boys are pairing up in the hallway together. Okay, yeah, it's part of growing up. There's going to be some attraction. But if you see boys and boys pairing up, it's automatically assumed that they're either going to be like, they're just like broing and just roughhousing and shit like that. But you don't actually consider the fact that, they might be involved. And even if there is any indication that they might be involved with each other, then the teacher doesn't see it as growing up together somehow. They see it as a disease. They see it as something wrong with it. And, that kind of highlights the double standards even within education itself. Like as a very root of growing up, that's where the discrimination, psychological discrimination, is very much existent. And that's one of the most under issues that's not talked about, is that we talk about denial of rights, we talk about denial of healthcare, we talk about everything, But I mean, the most basic thing, which even the most underprivileged children are still have some access to, is this very concept of childhood. And frankly, to suffer, when you think of a childhood, you don't go through suffering. You go through growing up, developing yourself, and going through life. Going from child to an adolescent to an adult, and that is something which even members from the LGBT community, before they realize they're members of the community, they are denied a childhood. So that's the gravity of it is quite I don't know. It's not really talked about enough.
Well, I mean, considering that we just drew the line between what sex is, which is what you're biologically, born as, and your organs that are present, and your gender identity is something how you identify yourself with and whom you express certain feeling, whom you are actually possessing, or rather have affectionate feelings towards, right? Considering that under gender identity, there is no biological difference. So why, considering you come from a medical background, Dhruv, what is your take on the healthcare being, like, basic healthcare being denied to this community, considering that the only difference is how they identify themselves as, and there is barely any biological difference except for the external pharmaceutical drugs that are given to them for hormones.
So now a lot of people themselves would agree that there's very little effect of sexual orientation on the kind of healthcare that you're receiving. And and a lot of doctors believe, like I think 6 out of 10 doctors would say that, okay, let's say if they're straight or they're bisexual or they're gay, it really would. But it's not about, it doesn't matter overall in healthcare. It probably doesn't in when you're approaching genital diseases. But when we speak about reproductive health, when we talk about sexual health, then it makes a huge difference. And we're just talking about just like sexual orientation here. And then when we go to another part about transgenderism and everything, like transgender individuals have reported to have a lot more adverse reactions from doctors themselves. They're stigmatized much higher. And we're talking about Western countries. Like when we come back home over here, it's a lot worse. So yeah, there is obviously a level of discrimination. There's a level of bias, because it's like we said, even in medical education itself, we talk a lot about everything is either male, female, this and that. But just on the basis of how less or how not very frequently you'll encounter these particular kinds of cases for these individuals is why it's ignored. And to be honest, the education is very archaic. It's old. It's almost traditional, right? And so I mean, we're talking about like some centuries ago, when the LGBT community was always ostracized from the society. Then like you wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't see them being allowed into clinics. You won't be able to see physicians. And so there's less as a result, there's obviously less documentation about them. They're just directly stigmatized. There is compared to other we talk about like binary individuals, there is not enough even rational research that's been made on it. In fact, when we look at the history of medicine in the LGBT community, we see so many instances where there have been just irrational biases that have been created, papers published without any actual research that's been made. In fact, it took us so long just for the Indian Psychiatric Society to rule that homosexuality is not a disease, right? It took decades. So that's when you find out that medicine itself has a long way to go in realizing that and more so not just medicine, but medical education itself, training doctors how to be sensitive, because we are all about bedside manners and soft skills now, but we do that, but we don't make it very inclusive. And the lack of inclusivity in medical education is what translates to discrimination in practice. So that really tends to just happen. Not tends to, it does happen.
Yeah, and adding to what Dhruv just mentioned, right? There are two things to for like a queer person. A, acceptance, and after my acceptance, like when I am accepting myself, or when a person is accepting herself for themselves, it's very important that you get right amount of the right support when it comes to psychological and psychiatrical support. And when the current psychiatric and psychological doctors that we have right now not well read about the problems that the community is facing, about the issues that they might encounter too, and then it becomes a very serious problem for us at whom we should go to, right? If I don't find a good person, a good psychiatrist to go to, who cannot make myself identify that what I am going through is something just very natural. And we have an instances like I was recently going through a video when like a 5-year-old kid was looking to a doctor, and the doctor said that you should put your child to in a more hetero space so that he can identify himself as more straight. And that was like a very shocking moment for me when I was going through that video. It's just that as a psychiatrist or a psychologist, your responsibility is for the person to help him or themselves explore a lot, not just push certain kind of ideology on that. Yeah, so this is something where you fit in. So this is something where you should push yourself and themselves too. And again, as a doctor, like right now, if I see there's a stigma attached to being a queer or a problem, like when recently Section 377 was abolished, now probably I can think of going to a doctor if I go through an anal sex and I do something that happens with me or my body, something which is not able to get well with the kind of sex I'm having. And then that stigma is something which holds me back going to a doctor, because I'm really not sure how will the doctor react. I'm really not sure that he or she will even have the idea of what I'm going through. Does the doctor even know probably that what will be a right kind of treatment for what I am coming for? So I think those are the stigmas which are still there. And more than the stigma, it's also about the knowledge that has been induced in the curriculums for as doctors or probably in schools, which will give you an insight of things which are changing in the society. And seeing the current government, I think it's been very minutely affecting them to just see that how we can work on that and also provide an inclusive education and spaces for the community to get more acceptance when it's come to just not in education, also seeing that how you can training other people in the society, because acceptance comes from ourselves, but also how the society is reacting to it. So how we are working on the basic education, and then we are trying to make it more inclusive for the community and bringing in those aspects so that they know about it and they know how to treat others when the people from the community come and approach them.
Absolutely. Like it's, medical, healthcare, medical education, healthcare, the very basic principle is that it should be indiscriminate, right? Regardless of who is approaching you and what they are, your biases should go out the window when you're treating them. And quite yet, that may have been applied to everything except this. I mean, so yeah, I mean, we've taken so much care into realizing why, the healthcare of women is such like a specialized approach. Rather, we take everything. For women, there's this. Women have, they're likely to have iron deficiency, or they're likely to have thyroid swelling and this and that, right? But there is no such special knowledge that is imparted when it comes to anybody from the LGBT community. So, like, let's say your average doctor, an average MBBS graduate has, let's say a transgender individuals approach them for whatever reasons. It's probably, even if it's especially if it's a reproductive issue that they're having, sort of, or like they're concerned about their sexual health over here. This particular doctor will, we're talking about a very generic doctor, he'll either feel uncomfortable about it, he will probably stigmatize him, he will probably refer him to someone else. Just a very out of sight, out of mind approach, because he has a bias may or may not be present, and even if it isn't, two is that he has no firm knowledge about what he's really supposed to do here, because that knowledge is never really given to him, right? We've been told, even like in medical ethics, how to handle female patients, why there should always, if you're a male doctor, there should always be a female attending present with you when you're with a female patient, right? But there is no such, we don't know what you're supposed to do over here. If you're a male doctor or a female doctor, is that rule supposed to be enacted when there's a transgender individual as a patient coming to you? You don't know. So there's a lot of soft skills, ethics, even the clinical part of it has just been ignored. And as medical education should be indiscriminate, to a degree, it is slightly discriminatory.
Yeah, I mean, like considering that we just spoke about how in the healthcare sector as such, there is lack of information about the community that we are discussing over here. I think it needs to be updated, because at the end of the day, the doctors do take a Hippocratic oath, if I'm not wrong, right? So over there, just to fall in line with the Hippocratic oath, I think just to provide justice and equity to the patient, they need to be aware of how to deal with the patient in terms of the how to handle the patient basically. So I mean, like I think we should I think I want to talk more about the second half of our topic, where we talk about the livelihood as well, right? And I think it all comes down to basic job security, because when we look at healthcare, food, and shelter, like the three things that we say every individual needs is food, shelter, and money, basically job security, right? Now, considering we are looking at healthcare and we discussed healthcare, I think we should focus more only right now on how we can strengthen the laws, I think, about job security and how, the community faces an issue with regards to attaining a loan, a house loan, a basic house loan, just when they come out as a transgender or a homosexual, right? So what do you guys propose? Because I think, when we talk about implementing certain laws or implementing a certain abolishment, rather, of a stigma and bringing certain issues to light in a way where it is as sensitive as this issue is, as sensitive as this topic is, it is very important for us to understand how an individual should feel secure in their professional workspace, right? Because at the end of the day, when the entire Nirbhaya unfortunate incident of the Nirbhaya case happened in our country, corporates did try to make sure that equality was maintained, even though the inequality still exists today. Professional workspaces have put out, have tried to go the extra mile to make sure that the inequality is abolished within their internal environment. But there have also been multiple accusations that the side that the women who have this ultimatum on their side have been misusing it in terms of to quote blackmail their male counterparts or the male colleague in the office space. So I think that this burden, how can we reduce this burden in terms of introducing a law or introducing a certain security for the LGBTQ plus community in their respective professional workspace to make sure that this sort of a stigma is abolished, that they will use this privilege for their benefit instead of using it to make sure that they're given an equality, an equal stance, and equal respect within the professional space.
Look, honestly, if when policies and laws are developed, they're developed based on need, right? I mean, we have an entire section of law that tends to the members of a lower caste, and so because they themselves have lesser opportunities, they're underprivileged, and so on, and they come from weaker economic backgrounds, they're socially ostracized, and so on and so forth. And now laws can be misused by anyone. That's not a reason for laws to be not made. And I don't think the question here is whether law should be made or not that reaffirms the Q communities, social holding in society. I think it's more about why haven't they been made yet? Women's, laws on women's equality have actually existed for a while now, but it only takes for a national crisis, such as the Nirbhaya case, for corporates, like you've just mentioned, to buckle down and start enacting their own corporate policies based on anti-harassment policies and all of this like that, and setting up mechanisms to address sexual harassment. So it's the same thing, except it's going the other way around. There are still we still live in a country where same-sex marriages are still illegal, and just very recently, like just a few years ago, was when homosexuality was, quote unquote, decriminalized. But just because you decriminalize something, it doesn't mean it's been legitimized by the society. And there are several institutions now in India themselves that have, have policies that protect um, the gay community, and it's going the other way around. We People are working at a corporate and an institution level first before even the government can do anything about it in its own legislature. And I think that's the real issue here, because as long as the government doesn't say anything, there's not a fixed ruling or a fixed stance that country can take. And honestly, I think, since obviously, Sumit, you worked with organizations, you worked with this thing. What do you have to say about their policies here?
Yeah, I think when you see current organization, like I work with Teach for India and working where I teach, we have very inclusive policies when it's come to conforming with all the sexes, like not discriminating on the basis of any sexuality or orientation. But one thing which is majorly important is that like even my job security is not there because I don't have that many options. And even if I get a job, how safe I am when it's come to under the law is something which is not there, because when we talk about the discrimination law, it does not encompass anything for male or transgenders. It does talk about like a justice for women, but as a cisgender male or as a person who inclines towards the community, I think even for a hetero male, the law right now is not that strong that will it enable security in the workspaces, right? If I face something in the organization, I can probably go reach out to the organization, but the organization can do very limited, like it cannot provide me justice for what has been done to me or anyone. They can just probably see that, okay, it's something which will help the organization run through, and that is where they might take some actions for it. But again, I think the justice is something which is demanded by the court, and for like that, there has to be concrete laws which might work, which has to work for making the livelihood of the people in the community prominent and very which you call the normal space like we have for the hetero community. How are you making the law supporting the LGBTQ community and seeing that it's the new normal. It's not like it's not there. Like it's something which we have to lead with acceptance. It will be there. You cannot change it. You cannot say that it's unnatural. It's just that you want to dream in your utopia and say that it doesn't accept it for yourself. But right now we will find more people who will be accepting themselves, because at least our generation is well read and known enough about the fact that how we need to run ourselves, and even our lineage will come through. So, but the government has to see that how they are working on the basic needs and they're providing that, right? If you like, as talk about same-sex marriage, it was just nullified for the sake of saying that in the Indian society, the marriage is a concept of just marrying of a male and female. But again, like a society which talks about like underage women getting married to a male who's like 40 years older to her, but two people who love each other cannot be married is a big question to ask from the government. And also one thing which we need to also see is that how the government is forming and getting into the using their policies very strongly, saying that we are able to provide the support that we need to support for the community, looking at the healthcare very specifically, because that is something which is important, other than also seeing that how we are able to provide the support for the livelihood when it's come to job security and other opportunities in the society.
Now, for example, what's as next to job security, as Sumit mentioned, we have another aspect. We talk about financial security, right? Now, you go to let's say you've done your education, you wanted to start a family. You can't really do much. The laws around you don't let you achieve what you want. You want to start a family, fine. Unfortunately, same-sex marriage is still not accepted in India, right? Even though homosexuality has been decriminalized. And their justification for it is that the homosexual couple do not comply to the Indian norms of having a male husband and a female wife and sort of a thing. It's a very slippery slope on which they're going on, like, because you need two human beings of this particular specific set to make this equation. Like it's on. I personally feel it's on that very slippery slope where the 3/5 compromise, where where during slavery, states classified slaves as 3/5 of a person because they were people, but just not enough and just not like us. And I see it like right up there, and it's a very dangerous place to be in, and it's a very dangerous justification to give. And based on that particular aspect, every single thing else has been laid out. Like after you come over the fact that okay, the LGBT exists, they're not going anywhere, they're queer and here, fine. What after? So you want to start a family, you're not able to because marriage itself is not legalized. I mean, barring the social stigma after that, then fine. Let's say that you go somewhere else, you get married, you come back here, you want to have children, you can't because in India, women are still not, lesbian couples are still not allowed to have IVF. Gay couples are still not allowed to have surrogate mothers. A lot of this. So the basics, the very basics of livelihood, starting a family, they're not able to do that. That's one thing. Then second, you go to like financial institutions. Next, you want to get a home, you want to get a mortgage. Homosexual couples are 73 times more likely to get turned down than heterosexual couples to get a mortgage. Like you can't get a loan for your house, you can't get a loan for your education, for your kids' education, a lot of that. Because at this point, it's not a personal thing anymore. It's about your life, right? Your partner's name, your name, both of you are going to approach a bank manager and he's going to turn you down because of his own internal bias. And this happens to minorities throughout. So we know this does exist. We know that Muslims get turned down for housing. We know that, so in the very same sense. So we're talking about financial instability. And then in general after that, so you put education, you put like family well-being, you put finances, you put childhood, you put all of this together, and it basically just equates into one thing, that if you're gay, society is going to do everything to make sure that you have the hardest time building your own life. And so when we see people like the first gay so and so or the first gay so and so, we're like, okay, he's gay and he happened to be the first person. It's not that. It's a lot more than that. It took that person a lot of trouble to get there. And same way as we like, okay, we celebrate the many force of women because we know how hard it was for women to get there. But when it comes to the gay community, that same exact journey that we went through, we don't apply it here. So that's exactly the first recognition of these hindrances, these obstacles that they face. And second, acknowledging that these obstacles are put in place by society and it's not by their existence. Their obstacles didn't manifest, but it was put there. So, I think this is important to recognize. But yeah, honestly, I think it's really great that we've spoken about this because it needs to be heard and it needs to be understood. Whether you're in support, whether you're an ally, or whether you're conservative, this exists and you can refute it all you want, but it'll still keep existing. So yeah.
And just concluding to what Dhruv said, I think I would simply say that all of us are individuals and we all have the same struggles, I think. And what the government need to realize is that what you are not doing is adding to more struggles like we have. Finding a job is a struggle that we might have and what you, like a normal hetero couple, might have. But again, we also have to suppress those struggles, and the government needs to just also see that no matter how, the struggles will still remain the same for us. So it's important that how you can lead to the acceptance of the community and not make it difficult for us to exist.
All right. That's a good note. That's a good note. I think end it here. Okay. And yeah, I truly thank you guys for truly having this talk. Thanks so much for coming here and really sharing your own because this is a community that you belong to, and it's I think it's about time that everyone, it's not about the people from the community start speaking up, but people outside the community start listening to them, and I think that's a lot more important now. But then again, thanks guys for having this conversation. It was wonderful.